I'm Simone, and for 4 long years, my parents let me believe I was their fortunate guest in a home I was secretly financing by myself. Every month, my architect's paycheck evaporated to prop up their glossy image, while they gently reminded me how lucky I was to have a roof. Ever felt like a visitor in your own house? Useful, functional, and somehow invisible. Before I tell you the exact second their mask fell off at that disastrous Sunday dinner, drop where you're watching from and hit subscribe. You'll want to see what happens when a black briefcase full of receipts lands in the middle of our table. The lie began 1,460 days ago. My parents, Walter and Celeste, talked me into buying a luxury high-rise condo in Miami's Brickell district under my name. "It's a tax strategy, sweetheart," my father cooed, wearing the paternal smile he saved from manipulation. I was 22, desperate for approval, and convinced this was a family plan. I signed. I thought we were partners. Reality was meaner. They dodged every responsibility while I drowned, my mortgage devouring more than 70% of my income. Meanwhile, they cruised around in a new BMW gleaming downstairs, that shiny emblem of hypocrisy basking in a parking spot my payments kept open. Their social media sparkled with Caribbean getaways and praised for being so self-made and giving. My days blurred into silent exhaustion. Up before dawn for the architecture firm, late nights finishing renderings I loved but never got to enjoy. Then home, to a place where I was treated like a tenant with restricted privileges. My mother's digs were small and sharp. "Simone, don't forget how expensive it is to keep this place going," she'd chirp, zipping up a new designer dress. My father would sigh over the burden of college costs for my younger siblings, Marcus and Chloe, cutting me a sideline glance as if my presence alone were a bill he had to pay. I felt like an ATM with legs, a tool, not a person. That Sunday, the air at dinner felt heavier than usual. Miami's sun streamed through the tall windows and lit the perfectly set table, but the brightness didn't cut through the tension. My mother's famous pot roast tried to sell the illusion of a cozy family, but even the gravy tasted like a performance. Marcus, 17, chewed in near silence. Chloe, 15, kept her eyes on her plate. We were all used to the unpredictability of mealtime. I pushed food around, feeling the sting of the bank transfer I'd made just 48 hours earlier. It was a massive on-time payment that left me with barely enough dollars for the rest of the month. No one at that table, besides my parents, knew what each bite actually cost me. The fragile balance snapped over something small. Marcus, tentative as boys get at that age, looked up and asked, "Dad, school's doing a field trip to the Keys. It's $500. Could I go?" For 3 seconds, nothing moved. A shadow slid across Walter's face. His jaw locked. His fork slammed the plate. A sharp, metallic crack that made us all flinch. I felt it in my spine. The benevolent father mask was slipping, and I knew exactly what was coming. The explosion was fast and vicious. $500, he barked, standing so abruptly his chair scuffed the floor. He jabbed a finger at Marcus, then flicked it toward Chloe. "You two only know how to drain our money. You think cash grows on trees? You're parasites. That's what you are. Parasites." The word lanced the air. Marcus reddened and shrank. Chloe curled in on herself. But the word that cut me clean through was a different one. Our money. A cold shock rinsed down my back. I could see the bank app screen in my mind. My name, my account. The massive figure that had bled out so the walls around us could stand. My mother didn't try to de-escalate. She tossed gasoline on the flames. "Your father's right," she sighed, voice pitched with prepackaged martyrdom. "We've worked all our lives to give you everything, and this is how you repay us? Ungrateful?" Her gaze brushed mine, not with comfort, but with warning. "Stay quiet. Keep the act alive." And in that instant, their partnership clicked into place like a lock. They weren't two overwhelmed parents. They were co-conspirators in a long con. Their children were both the audience and the source of funding. That's when something inside me broke, but not into tears, not into rage. A strange stillness took over. 4 years of resentment, of quiet humiliations, of sleepless nights spiraled down into a single, sharp decision. While my father droned on about sacrifice and ingratitude, my brain tuned him out. I could think of only one thing: the black leather briefcase in the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was the deed, in my name, and every single one of the 47 mortgage payment confirmations. Documented truth. No spin, no performance. The ledger of my captivity. Chaos rattled on around me, but inside, everything went quiet. I looked at my siblings, frightened, confused. I looked at my parents, swollen with a swagger built on my back, and I knew the show was over. I wasn't going to be the silent foundation holding up their fantasy. I wasn't going to bankroll their lifestyle at the expense of my life. The architect in me, the one who knows foundations, understood the structure was rotten. There was only one solution: controlled demolition. I stood up without a word. My father was still lecturing, but his voice had become background hum. The calm in me was so complete that the room fell quiet, eyes turning toward me like I was a stranger in their house. I walked down the hall. My father's stare burned between my shoulder blades. My mother's gaze carried panic. Marcus and Chloe watched with that mix of fear and curiosity kids wear when they sense everything is about to change. I didn't look back. Every step on that polished marble my payments made possible, was a step toward freedom. In my room, I shut the door with a soft click. Silence. I knelt at my desk. The same desk where I'd pulled late nights for drawings and reports that funded their vacations, and reached into the bottom drawer. Fingers brushed cold leather. The briefcase wasn't just papers. It was the weight of 4 years. Each transfer a night I went without. A small luxury denied. A piece of me withheld so the mortgage would clear. My stomach turned as an image flashed. My mother last week, sparkling as she modeled a new diamond necklace. A little splurge. You have to enjoy life. She'd said it while I negotiated an extension on my car insurance. I thought of the BMW my father had paraded into the garage 6 months ago, right after I'd received a project bonus, to celebrate the family's success. He toasted, lifting a glass in my direction. Back then, a foolish part of me wanted to believe the line, that our success was shared. That was before the word parasites. My success wasn't for celebrating. It was for consuming. Footsteps hurried down the hall. The handle turned. Celeste stepped in. The poised socialite mask had slipped. Worry cracked her composure. "Simone, what are you doing?" she hissed. Eyes fixed not on my face, but on the briefcase. "Your father is upset. You know how he gets about money." She knew exactly what was about to happen. This wasn't ignorance. It was fear. Fear that the house of cards she'd helped build would collapse in front of her children. "Don't worry, Mom," I said, my voice sounding like steel. "I'm just going to clear a few things up." Her face crumpled from anxiety into raw panic. "Don't make a scene. Think of your brother and sister. Think of our reputation." Guilt and shame, her favorite tools. They didn't fit in my hands anymore. Reputation? It had been funded by my exhaustion. And my siblings' safety was threatened by my father's tyranny, not my honesty. I stepped past her and returned to the dining room. Walter sat again, drinking water, jaw wired tight. Marcus and Chloe had it moved. Neither had their forks. I set the briefcase on the center of the mahogany table, beside the cooling pot roast. The leather hit the wood with a solid, flat thud, an ending. My father's eyes snapped to it. He knew. He'd stood next to me when I signed the mortgage, patting my back, praising me for being smart enough to follow his financial advice. I unlatched the case and flicked it open. The room seemed to pull in around us. I reached in and drew the first sheet. Owner, Simone Hayes. I slid the deed across the table until it stopped in front of my father. The color began to drain from his face. My father stared at the deed like it might bite. My mother's face went blank. The practiced serenity melted into something closer to dread. I reached back into the briefcase and pulled out the first stack of papers. Year 1, I said, clear and calm, and dropped the 12 confirmations on top of the deed. A tidy stack of bank slips that, together, weighed a ton. Year 2, another neat pile. Year 3, then the last, and the most recent 12 months. 47 payments. every one from my account. My father's mask crumpled in slow motion. He glanced at my mother for a cue. She had nothing to offer him now. Her eyes were fixed on the proof splayed across the wood, the glossy finish reflecting a reality they'd kept hidden for years. Marcus and Chloe sat there, stunned, watching the scene as if the sound had been turned down. The realization was beginning to register. What it really cost to live here. Who was paying? Why I was always tired. My father found his voice at last. "What is this, Simone?" he rasped. It wasn't a question. It was a last flimsy defense. He knew exactly what it was. "It's the truth. And it's the last time I'll be the only one carrying it." He surged to his feet, hand reaching for the papers. I didn't move. Just looked him in the eye. The stillness stopped him more effectively than a shove would have. He faltered. My mother switched tactics. Her face rearranged itself into a fragile portrait of her. "Sweetheart, please," she murmured, voice wobbling. "We're your family. Are you really going to do this to us? To your brother and sister?" There it was. Guilt, wheeled out like heavy artillery. Once it would have worked, not anymore. I set my phone on the table, opened the recent calls, and tapped Mr. Henderson's number. He picked up on the first ring. "We're proceeding," I said, not taking my eyes off my parents. "Yes, start the clock." I ended the call and placed the phone next to the piles of proof. The click was soft, final. No one spoke. Even the pot roast had gone cold under the weight of it. "You're out of your mind," my father snapped, anger finally swelling to fill the void. "Those papers don't mean anything. This was a family arrangement. We did this to shelter assets for your own good. After everything we've done?" "Stop," I said, not raising my voice. "This property is in my name. The payments came from my account. Legally, you're my tenants. Your rent-free arrangement ends tonight." My mother's eyes flared. "You throw your parents out on the streets?" I continued, steady, unshakable. "At hour 49, Mr. Henderson files for eviction." The words landed with the weight of a signed order. No heat, no theatrics, just the plan. A small sound broke the silence. "Chloe." She lifted her head, eyes rimmed red, voice thin but clear. "Mom, is that why Simone never bought new clothes? Or why she was always too tired to go to the movies with us?" She didn't look at me. She was looking straight at the woman who had taught her what family meant. My mother opened her mouth. No words came out. I watched the moment connect inside my sister's mind. The late nights, the missed outings, the quiet misery I'd tucked away. A simple question dismantled years of careful fiction better than any speech could. Marcus stared at our parents like he was seeing strangers. The humiliation on his face wasn't about the field trip anymore. It was about a lifetime of being fed a story that had never been true. "Enough," my father barked, volume back up again, as if noise could stuff the truth back down. "You don't understand adult matters, Chloe. Stay out of—" I moved without thinking, stepping between him and the kids. "Stop." The word cut through his bluster like a blade. I turned to my brother and sister, gentling my tone. "Go to my room. Pack a small bag. Clothes for a few days, school stuff, chargers. You're coming with me." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a lifeline. Marcus nodded, dazed, and helped Chloe up. Neither of them looked at our parents as they left the room. The power shifted on its axis. The word parasite, which my father had thrown like a dart minutes earlier, seemed to hang in the air, drifting back toward its source. I gathered the deed and confirmations, slid them back into the case, and snapped it shut. The leather made a dull sound against the table. 48 hours. I repeated, meeting each of their eyes in turn. "All communication about the property and about Marcus and Chloe goes through counsel. Do not contact them directly." I stood. My parents didn't move. They looked smaller somehow, like two people waking from a dream to find the house had been built on water. I left them there, in the quiet they'd created. The dining room looked like a stage after the show had ended. Props in place, audience gone, the story finally over. In my room, Marcus and Chloe sat on the bed, faces pale, bags gaping open. They looked like survivors pulled from a wreck. "You were paying for everything?" Chloe whispered, not quite asking. "For a long time," I said. "It ends tonight." Marcus's throat worked. "If I hadn't asked for the trip, this isn't because of you," I said firmly. "You flipped a switch in a room that was already cracked. That's all." The hallway creaked. A shadow fell under my door. "Simone," my mother called softly, the false warmth back in place. "Open up. Let's talk. As a family." I pressed my palm to the wood. "There is nothing left to discuss," I said, voice low and even. "The deadline stands. Any contact goes through Mr. Henderson." Silence. Then a hiss of frustration. "You don't know what you're doing. You'll regret this." Her footsteps retreated. A promise, not a surrender. Night fell heavy and strange. Through the walls, we heard drawers yanked open and slammed shut. Hushed, sharp arguments. The clink of glass shattering. My father's voice once, jagged with fear. "Do you understand what this looks like?" They weren't grieving what they had done to me. They were grieving their loss of access, of status, convenience, a lifestyle built on my back. Near midnight, the house finally went still. I opened my door and peered into the dark hall. "Now," I whispered. We moved like ghosts. Sneakers soft on marble, breath held at every creak. Past the closed door of my parents' room, past the framed photos of smiling faces, down to the garage. The door hummed as it lifted. Under fluorescent light, the BMW gleamed, slick and obscene. Marcus and Chloe stowed their bags in the trunk of my modest sedan. I walked by the BMW and let my keys lightly trail the paint on the driver's door. Not to vandalize, just to mark the end of a lie. A hairline scratch on a perfect surface. We drove out into Miami's warm night, 3 silhouettes in a small car. The city opening ahead of us like a map we finally had the right to redraw. The hotel was perfect in the way only anonymous places can be. Neutral carpet, generic art, a door that locked behind us with a solid click. From the 12th floor, Miami's lights glittered like a distant constellation. Marcus and Chloe finally let their shoulders drop. We ordered room service. Burgers and fries, an artificial normal that grounded us in the present. While they ate cross-legged on the bed, I watched them. I didn't see ungrateful kids. I saw a boy and girl who had been living inside someone else's fiction. I sat and told them the truth. Not the spreadsheets or amortization tables, but the part that mattered. The weight of the secret, the loneliness of carrying it. How badly I had wanted to be seen as a person, not a paycheck. I wasn't fishing for pity. I wanted understanding. I found it in their eyes. When they finished eating, I shifted into crisis mode, the part of me that designs bridges, kicking in. I said gently, "Pack for a week. Clothes, school stuff, chargers. We'll be okay." While they moved slowly around the room, still stunned, still careful, I made a list in my head. Call their school, open a fresh bank account, move recurring payments, keep Henderson looped in on every step, build structure over a chasm. Knocks sounded at the hotel door in my memory, the sound of my mother outside my bedroom, then faded. Here, the only sounds were muted traffic and the clink of ice in the hallway dispenser. We slept in bursts. At dawn, my phone vibrated. An email from Mr. Henderson. "Simone, your parents' attorney has informed me they refuse to vacate voluntarily. They are asserting emotional and financial investment in the property and requesting mediation to seek fair compensation. Walter has also canceled the supplementary cards for Marcus and Chloe." I read it twice. The audacity would have stunned me yesterday. Today, it clarified the line. They weren't going to slink away. They were going to escalate. Emotionally, financially, legally. Canceling the kids' cards was the message beneath the legalese. If you protect them, you'll pay for it. I looked at my brother and sisters sleeping, their faces finally slack, their breathing even. The move designed to scare me had the opposite effect. It welded my resolve. I set the briefcase on the little hotel desk and opened it. The deed, 47 payment receipts, tax returns, my army. Their request for mediation wasn't a negotiation. It was the place where their story would collapse in daylight. The law firm's conference room was all gloss. Mahogany, glass, air that smelled faintly of citrus and paper. I sat straight beside Mr. Henderson, the black briefcase on my lap like a shield. Across from us, my parents had a lawyer too, a slick man with a practiced, sympathetic smile. Walter and Celeste had costumed themselves as the injured party. It was almost impressive, the way they held their poses. I didn't feel nervous. I felt clean, clear. Their attorney began with a syrupy tone that made my skin crawl. He spoke of implied family agreements, emotional equity, and the substantial, non-monetary contributions his clients had made to support me. Walter nodded solemnly, as if listening to a sermon. Celeste dabbed at a dry eye with a silk handkerchief. The scene was staged to cast me as ungrateful and unstable. Then the mediator nodded to my father. Walter adopted the voice of a disappointed patriarch. "We always wanted what was best for Simone," he said, looking at me like I'd betrayed him. "We advised her to purchase the condo because she lacked the financial maturity for such a responsibility. We protected her. Everything we've done was to secure our children's future." He even had the nerve to mention the BMW, not as a luxury, but as a necessary professional tool to maintain appearances for the good of the family. Celeste took over. Fragile, trembling, flawless. "That house isn't just a property. It's where we raised our kids, where we celebrated every birthday and Christmas. It's our family's heart, and now she wants to rip that out over money." She let the last word shiver like a bell tolling for filial duty. In that sterile room, their performance rang hollow. The heart of the family they invoked had pumped with a steady transfusion of my bank account. Gratitude, love, duty, words they'd weaponized until they no longer meant anything. They finished. Silence pressed in. Everyone looked at me, waiting for rebuttal, for tears, for a scene. Instead, I lifted the briefcase, set it in the center of the table, and flipped the latches. The soft thud of leather on wood ended their monologue. My father's forehead creased. My mother's eyes flashed panic. Mr. Henderson gave me the slightest nod. It was time for facts. I drew out the first document and slid it across the table myself, letting it stop in front of Walter. "Deed," I said, voice even. "Legal owner, Simone Hayes." His lawyer leaned in to read. His smile wobbled. Color bled from my father's face. I opened the first of the organized folders and began laying out the bank transfer confirmations, one by one, a paper spine running across the table. 47 mortgage payments, every dollar from my personal account. Total to date, $282,000, not including taxes and HOA fees, which I also covered. With each sheet, something shifted across from me. Self-righteousness slid into fear. The word parasites echoed somewhere far away. Up close, all I could hear was the dry whisper of paper, the sound of a lie dismantled by arithmetic. I kept going. "The clincher," Mr. Henderson said evenly, sliding another folder into the center, "is here." He fanned out copies of Walter and Celeste's amassed 4 years of tax returns, public records. "Notice anything missing?" he asked the mediator. "They never claimed mortgage interest on this property. If they'd actually contributed, omitting it would be problematic. In contrast," he tapped a line item, "you'll see that for 2 of those years, they listed Simone as a financial dependent, while she earned a solid salary that, as we've demonstrated, covered every housing expense for the unit they occupied without paying rent." The room didn't gasp, but it tightened. Their attorney's smile fell off his face. He stared at the forms, then at my parents, realizing they'd walked him into an unwinnable story. Walter's complexion went gray. Celeste's hand crept to her mouth. She didn't look at me. She looked at him. And for the first time, I saw blame instead of alliance flicker in her eyes. I stood. The weight I'd carried for 4 years slid off like a heavy coat. "I don't want a cent," I said, voice calm. "I want my home. You have 24 hours to vacate, and I'll be petitioning for temporary custody of Marcus and Chloe tomorrow morning. Their stability is my only condition." It wasn't a threat. It was a decision. Without waiting for a response, I closed the briefcase. Mr. Henderson gathered the copies. We walked out into Miami heat and blinding sun. It didn't feel oppressive anymore. It felt like weather, real, neutral, honest. There was no victory parade, just the quiet after a controlled blast when the dust starts to settle, and you can finally see the outline of what comes next. The next day, Mr. Henderson called. Their lawyer confirmed they'll be out by noon. Keys with a concierge. No contest to temporary custody. That was it. Cornered by documentation and the hint of their own tax exposure, they chose silence over spectacle. A cousin later told me they left in the dead of night with an unmarked moving truck. The BMW, of course, was gone first, liquidated to cover fees and a deposit on a modest rental far from their former crowd. When Marcus, Chloe, and I walked back into the condo, the air felt different. Not better, not worse, just honest. Their things were gone, pale rectangles on the walls marked where photos had hung. It smelled like lemon cleaner and absence. Chloe opened the fridge like it really belonged to her and poured a glass of juice. Marcus sat on the sofa where our father used to hold court and let out a long breath. Not grief, relief he didn't know he'd been holding. The place wasn't a stage anymore. It was a blank floor plan waiting to be drawn. The legal shifts happened fast. With the evidence stacked cleanly, a judge granted me temporary custody without resistance. On counsel's advice, Walter and Celeste went quiet. No calls, no emails, no surprise visits. Their social circle didn't get the full story, but they got enough. Invites dried up, smiles cooled. The punishment wasn't a courtroom scene. It was social erasure. For people who prized status above substance, irrelevance cut deepest. For me, the first mortgage payment after they left felt normal, just a bill, not a shackle. I stood at the counter, hit submit, and didn't taste bile. It was my roof now, ours. We started reclaiming space. I turned my father's heavy, performative office into an art studio for Chloe. Easels by the window, jars of brushes, light spilling across canvases. The grand primary bedroom, once a monument to someone else's ego, became our shared movie and games room. Projector, floor cushions, mismatched blankets. Each change felt like opening a window. Clearing the last dresser, I found a music box my mother had treasured. I wound it once. The tune wobbled and fell flat. I closed it and set it in the donation box. Not with anger, not with nostalgia, just done. We're not storybook perfect. Marcus misses his old neighborhood. Sometimes Chloe goes quiet in a way that echoes the past. I carry the weight of being the only adult in the room now. But dinner isn't a minefield anymore. We talk about dumb memes and pop quizzes and which pizza place is actually best. We're clumsy at it. We're learning. I booked a therapist for all three of us. Healing isn't erasing. It's integrating. We're building muscles we were never taught to use. One night, a couple weeks in, Marcus hovered in the doorway while I sketched at the dining table, the same slab of wood that had been our battlefield. He looked older. He cleared his throat. I'm sorry I asked for the keys money. If I hadn't, hey, I set my pencil down. You didn't break anything. You flipped on a light in a room already full of cracks. That helped us get out before the ceiling came down. He nodded, something uncoiling in his shoulders. Chloe, listening from the hall, stepped forward and wrapped her arms around both of us. We stood there, awkward and fierce, and laid the first bricks of a real home. My relationship with our parents ended in that conference room. Months later, Celeste sent an email dripping with self-pity, blaming me for their downfall and for stealing her children. I deleted it and blocked her. Walter never reached out. For them, I stopped existing the moment I stopped being useful. Oddly, that didn't stab, it soothed. Cutting away a gangrenous limb hurts, yes, but you live. Indifference replaced anger. It's how I knew I was finally free. Nights feel different now. Sometimes after Marcus finishes homework and Chloe rinses paint from her brushes, I stand at the living room window and look out over Miami's grid of lights. For years, those lights felt like spectators to a gilded cage. Now they look like 100,000 open doors. The city didn't change. I did. The mortgage notice still lands on the first of the month. I brew coffee, log in, and pay it without a lump in my throat. It's not a shackle anymore. It's a key. Evidence of a home that belongs to us, not to an illusion. Routines have grown roots. Mornings are loud and ordinary. Searching for a missing hoodie, arguing about bus times, laughing at a meme someone shoves in my face while I'm trying to pack lunches. Evenings sprawl in comfortable ways. Chloe spreads canvases across drop cloths on the floor. Marcus sprawls with a physics problem that I pretend to understand. I edit drawings and catch myself smiling for no reason at all. We've developed small rituals. Friday night means movies in the big room with the projector and too much popcorn. Tuesdays I burn dinner and we ordered Thai. Thursdays are quieter. Chloe shows us a new painting under the good lamp by the window. Marcus teaches us something he learned that I swear I'll remember and absolutely won't. On Sundays, I make a point of asking, what was your best thing this week? It sounds corny. It isn't. It's scaffolding, habit layered over habit until something solid holds. Therapy helps. There are sessions where one of us speaks and two of us just breathe through it. There are sessions where we laugh like we've been doing it for years. We're not erasing what happened. We're learning how to carry it without letting it carry us. Other changes are quieter. I caught myself the other day in a shop window and didn't flinch at the person looking back. I sleep straight through more nights than not. I no longer rehearse arguments in the shower that I'll never get to have with people who don't deserve the breath. Indifference finally replaced anger, and the absence of that weight is its own kind of euphoria. Work feels different too. I'm still an architect who loses track of time and plans and sections and sightlines. But the metaphor isn't lost on me. For 4 years, I lived in a structure with hidden rot. I kept slapping on paint and pretending that would keep the beams from failing. Now my job, at home and on paper, is the same. Test the load, shore the weak points, refuse shortcuts that look pretty but end in collapse. One afternoon, I rolled up a set of blueprints at the dining table and realized the room didn't feel like a battleground anymore. It felt like what it was supposed to be, a place we meet, not a stage, not a court, just a table. There are slips. Of course there are. Marcus sometimes pauses in the doorway like he's bracing for a tone that no longer lives here. Chloe will go still and quiet, and I've learned not to fill the silence with noise, but to sit next to her until she's ready to talk. Or not. I falter too. On the days the responsibilities stack too high and old doubts rattle their chains, then something small breaks through. A joke, a mug placed at my elbow, the smell of acrylic paint, the sound of my own laugh. We keep going. I didn't realize how much space the light took up until it was gone. Now that it's quiet, there's room for things that don't make noise. Trust, ease, the possibility of joy that arrives without a grand announcement. Sometimes peace is dramatic. Sometimes it's the sound of a dishwasher humming while someone sings off-key in the shower down the hall. Standing at the window, Miami's lights look like a network of possibilities. I think about foundations the way only someone who's lived through a collapse can. A house is concrete, still wood. A home is truth, respect, and boundaries that don't bend just because someone calls them family. I used to think strength meant carrying everything until my knees locked. Now I know strength is setting something down and refusing to pick it up again, even when someone you love insists that you must. The blueprint for what comes next is blank. I'm not afraid of that blank anymore. I have a pencil, I have a steady hand, and this time I get to draw. Looking back, the biggest lesson wasn't about money. It was about foundations. As an architect, I'm trained to design structures that last, weight-bearing, resilient, honest about their loads. For 4 years, I lived inside a frame with hidden rot. We kept repainting the trim and pretending the beams wouldn't fail. But a house built on lies will collapse. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to be the one who calls for demolition. My story isn't about noisy revenge. It's about the quiet force of truth. I used to think strength meant enduring, absorbing impact, swallowing hurt, holding the ceiling up alone because family. But real strength wasn't in how much I carried. It was in setting it down and refusing to pick it back up. You don't need to scream to be heard. Sometimes a document, an irrefutable fact, a firm decision made without shaking hands has more power than any tirade. Dignity isn't reclaimed by rolling in the same mud as people who profit from your silence. It's restored by standing up steady, with the ledger of what's real on your side. I also learned family isn't a blank check for harm. We're taught blood binds, that loyalty means forgiving anything forever. But no tie gives someone the right to consume another person's life to prop up their image. Sometimes the most loving act for yourself and for those who rely on you is to draw a line and say, this is where it ends. I thought silence was the price of peace, that if I swallowed one more comment, paid one more bill, let one more month slide, we'd avoid a war. But silence doesn't buy peace. It rents time, while resentment grows like invasive roots. Truth may land like an explosion, but it's the only thing that clears ground for something healthy to grow. If you're living an injustice in silence because you fear the fallout of speaking up, hear me. The cost of your silence is your life, your happiness, your sanity, and that price is too high.
If there's one practical takeaway I want you to keep, it's this: document your life. That black briefcase wasn't just a legal strategy. It was my anchor to reality. On the days their gaslighting made me doubt my memory, those pages, deeds, transfers, emails, held the line. Proof isn't only for courts. It's a mirror you hold up to yourself when someone tries to warp your sense of what's true. Save the receipts, keep the messages, file the statements. When the story gets twisted, the paper won't. Freedom didn't arrive like a parade. It came quietly, like a room exhaling after the noise stops. It looked like choosing dinner with my brother and sister without a comment about the cost. It sounded like sleeping through the night without doing math at 3 a.m. It felt like paying the mortgage and feeling nothing but normal. Rebuilding is slow. Scars don't vanish, but they stop stinking. And every day we wake in a home where truth, not fear, sets the tone, I know I chose right. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the presence of justice in your own life. So I'll leave you with the question. What are you willing to invest to protect your peace? The price can look steep. The cost of not paying it is your one life. If any part of this spoke to you, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. If you want more, please subscribe so you don't miss what's next. And if you'd like to support these stories, a super thanks truly helps me keep creating. On screen, you'll see 2 more life stories I highly recommend. There's plenty more waiting on the channel. With love and respect, see you in the next one.